Hello, this is Dr. Mystic. I want to continue on our series about the life of St. Jude Thaddeus. And we're looking at some of the most ancient sources of the story of the conversion of King Abgar of Edessa at the agency of the apostle who's called in Aramaic Mar Addai, or St. Jude Thaddeus. Now, in an earlier video, we talked about Eusebius, and he wrote around the year 325. At the end of this program, I want to have a few more insights about Eusebius and Constantine. But in this program, we're going to talk about Egeria or Egeria, the pilgrim. And she wrote around the year 380, 381. And in the earlier video, we mentioned how around that time is when Emperor Theodosius named the empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, as a Christian empire. He's the one that did that, not Constantine, even though Constantine publicly converted to Christianity and promoted the religion. The Roman Empire didn't become officially Christian until around the year 381. But at this time, this woman named Egeria, and she was believed to have been from Spain, but now that's up for dispute. I think because in her book she mentions a river in France. So she was from Europe, and there was a lot of theories about her. Like, some people thought that she was a nun. This is a very religious and devout woman, but we don't know that she was a nun. So she goes on this pilgrimage, and she wrote a book about her experiences, and that has survived. But the first few pages and the last few pages are lost. But she goes to Mount Sinai, she goes to the Holy Land, and she goes to Edessa, the city of King Abgar, and she sees the letter, the message from King Abgar to Jesus and the response, and that's included in her account. So something else that's also important about Egeria is this is the first book that we know of that's authored by a Christian woman that has her name on it. Now, there are certain books that may have been written by a woman. Some people think that the Epistle of Hebrews was written by Priscilla and Aquila, but we don't know that for certain. That's just conjecture. And like the Odes of Solomon, or some of these Acts of the Apostles, like the Acts of Thomas, even the stories of Thaddeus, women play a prominent role. And I think it's evident from these ancient sources that women had a prominent role in the early church period that was, for whatever reason, diminished over the passing of centuries. But it's because Christianity was liberating. I think Rodney Stark has written about it in some of his books. He just recently passed away. But women were seen as, in many ways, inferior. But the New Testament message we have in Christ, there's no male and female, slave or free man, we're all equal. And for instance, in certain, like the mystery religions, women were entirely excluded. And women have never been excluded from the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper. So Christianity was more of an inclusive religion for women, especially at that time in history, is revolutionary. So it's possible that some earlier literature might have been written by women, but many women at that time were illiterate. That's just the way it was. Most men were illiterate. Like in Athens, in the height of Athens, scholars estimate that only 20% of men could read. So you're looking at less than 2% of women could read. But I think that if you look at these Acts of the Apostles, like the Acts of Philip, the Acts of Thomas, women have such an important role in those stories that it makes me suspect that women, those books were written for women. Either they were the patronesses of these books, or as the intended audience of the writers of these legends of the 12 apostles that have come down to us. So there might have been books that were written for a female audience. There might have been anonymous books that could have been written by a woman. But the earliest book that we know for a fact was written by a woman is Egeria's, her itinerary for pilgrimage, written around the year 380. And she spent multiple years on this pilgrimage. And some of it's very interesting reading, but she's very interested in liturgy. And today there's a lot of people that are interested in liturgy. And as I mentioned in other programs, you have the liturgy of Saint Thaddeus, or Marmari and Mar Addai, which is still used by the Assyrian Church and is one of the oldest liturgies in the world that's been continually used the passage of century. There's not a more ancient liturgy that's still used besides the liturgy of Saint Jude Thaddeus and Saint Mari. So Egeria was very interested in the liturgical calendar and the services, and that has tremendous historical value. But what makes more stimulating reading is her visiting, Mount Sinai and going to Edessa and what she saw and experienced over there. So she tells the story of King Abgar and Thaddeus. Interestingly enough, she mentions Thomas because Thomas's tomb was in Edessa. In the Acts of Thomas, it mentions that Thomas was martyred in India, but an Assyrian Christian took his body back and had him buried in Edessa. So she sees the tomb of the Apostle St. Thomas. And Thaddeus and Thomas, I guess some people confuse them, but both names start with the TH, I guess. And she doesn't mention Thaddeus by name, even though she mentions the story that was recorded decades earlier by Eusebius. It could have just been an oversight that she made when she wrote the account. And she mentions there are many stories that she heard that she didn't write down. Perhaps it would have been better if she did, because she might have preserved a lot of materials and traditions that have been lost to us. But regardless, what she did write is very, very important. It's a very interesting read. It has tremendous historical value, and she also gives her account of the life and story of the conversion of King Abgar by Thaddeus. Even though she doesn't mention Thaddeus by name, she mentions Thomas. But in Eusebius, it mentions that Thomas sent Thaddeus to go and preach to the Assyrians. And it seems that Thomas himself passed through the region on his way through Parthia into India, where he was sent to preach the gospel. So what I want to include here is Leah Rose Fisher. She's reading the story of Egeria that deals with the story of St. Jude Thaddeus and the conversion of King Abgar. So I want to include this here. I did a film project telling the story of Egeria. And I'm still in the process of editing after all this time. I'm going to do a book on that as well. But Leah's, she's an operatic singer. She did a song for our project called The Letter of the King of Assyria to the King of Kings, which I believe is on Apple and iTunes. You can download it there and view it. So she's also trying to do a lot more things. She's working in Christian filmmaking, and she just did the play of Perpetua. This is a woman of Carthage in Africa who gave her life for her faith. So this is an important story relating to the story of Thaddeus and the conversion of the Assyrians. So I want you to listen to what Egeria had to say in the context of the story for herself. And there's various translations of this book, and since it's very important historically, as the first book written by a Christian woman, but also this unique perspective she has going on this pilgrimage and all the important historical information that she includes. So I hope you enjoy this, learn a lot from it, and stay tuned for upcoming programs. Remember, check out Leah Rose Fisher and her endeavors, because it's important for Christians to engage the culture. You look at what's going on in society and culture, people are very troubled by it, and rightly so. And part of the problem is that Christians have not been we'll talk about the culture wars. We haven't been engaging the culture through the arts, and people on the left realize how important the educational establishment is, and they use that to further their Marxist agenda. Or Hollywood. People complain about these woke movies, and it seems like what they say, get woke, go broke, and Hollywood's doing that. And it's like they seem to care more about furthering a political agenda than making quality entertainment that the audience responds to. The problem is Christians haven't been engaged, but now it's time to engage the culture through the arts, as the church has historically, so we can reinforce good, wholesome values and strengthen society and culture through engaging the arts.
We arrived at Edessa in the name of Christ our God, and on our arrival we straightway repaired to the church and memorial of St. Thomas. There, according to custom, prayers were made, and the other things that were customary in the holy places were done. We read also some things concerning St. Thomas himself. The church there is very great, very beautiful, and of new construction, well worthy to be the house of God. And as there was much that I desired to see, it was necessary for me to make a 3-day stay there. Thus I saw in that city many memorials, together with holy monks, some dwelling at the memorials, while others had their cells in more secluded spots farther from the city. Moreover, the holy bishop of the city, a truly devout man, both monk and confessor, received me willingly, and said,
"As I see, daughter, that for the sake of devotion you have undertaken so great a labor in coming to these places from far distant lands. If you are willing, we will show you all of the places that are pleasant to the sight of Christians."
Then, first thanking God, I besought the bishop much that he would deign to do as he said. He thereupon led me first to the palace of King Abgar, where he showed me a great marble statue of him, very much like him, as they said, having a sheen as if made of pearl. From the face of Abgar, it seemed that he was a very wise and honorable man. Then the holy bishop said to me,
"Behold King Abgar, who before he saw the Lord believed in him, that he was in truth the Son of God."
There was another statue near, made of the same marble, which he said was that of his son Magnus. This also had something gracious in the face. Then we entered the inner part of the palace, and there were fountains full of fish, such as I had never seen before, of so great size, so bright, and of so good a flavor were they. The city has no water at all other than that which comes out of the palace, which is like a great silver river. Then the holy bishop told me about the water, saying, at some time after that King Abgar had written to the Lord, and the Lord had answered King Abgar by Ananias the courier, as it is written in the letter itself. When some time had passed, the Persians came against the city and surrounded it. And straightway Abgar, bearing the letter of the Lord to the gate, with all his army, prayed publicly. And he said, O Lord Jesus, thou hadst promised us that none of our enemies should enter the city, and lo, the Persians now attack us. And when the king had said this, holding the open letter in his uplifted hands, suddenly there came a great darkness outside the city, before the eyes of the Persians, as they were approaching the city at a distance of about 3 miles. And they were so baffled by the darkness that they could hardly form their camp and surround the whole city about 3 miles off. So baffled were the Persians that they could never afterwards see the way to enter the city, but they surrounded it and shut it in with their hostile forces, at a distance of about 3 miles, for several months. Then, when they saw that they could by no means enter, they wished to slay those within the city by thirst. Now, that little hill which you see, my daughter, over against the city, supplied it with water at that time. And the Persians, perceiving this, diverted the water from the city, and made it to run near that place where they had made their camp. And on that day, at that hour, when the Persians diverted the water, the fountains which you see in this place burst forth at once at God's bidding, and by the favor of God they remain here from that day to this. But the water which the Persians had diverted was dried up at that hour, so that they who were besieging the city had nothing to drink for even 1 day. Which thing is plain to the present time, for no moisture of any sort has ever been seen there from that day to this. So, at God's bidding, who had promised that this should come to pass, they were obliged to return to their own home in Persia. Moreover, afterwards, as often as enemies determined to come and take the city, this letter was brought out and read in the gate, and straightway all enemies were driven back by the will of God. The holy bishop also told me that the place where these fountains broke forth had previously been open ground within the city, lying under the palace of King Abgar, which same palace had been situated on somewhat higher ground, as was plainly visible. For the custom was at that time that whenever palaces were built, they should always stand on higher ground. But after that, these fountains had burst forth here. Then Abgar built this palace for his son Magnus, whose statue I saw near that of his father, so that the fountain should be included in the palace. And when the holy bishop had told me all these things, he said to me, Let us now go to the gate by which Ananias the courier entered with the letter of which I spoke. So when we had come to the gate, the bishop, standing, made a prayer and read us the letters. Then, after he had blessed us, another prayer was made. Moreover, the holy man told us that from the day on which Ananias the courier entered it with the letter of the Lord, the gate is kept to this day, that no one who is unclean, nor any mourner, should pass through, nor should any dead body be borne out through it. The holy bishop also showed us the memorial of Abgar and of his whole family, very beautiful, but made in the ancient style. He took us also to the palace which King Abgar had at first on the higher ground, and if there were any other places he showed them to us. It was very pleasant to me to receive from the holy man himself the letters of Abgar to the Lord, and of the Lord to Abgar, which the holy bishop had read to us there. For although I have copies at home, yet it seemed to me more pleasant to receive them from him, lest perhaps something less might have reached us at home, and indeed that which I received here is fuller. So, if Jesus our God bids it, and I come home, you too shall read them. Ladies, my own souls.
In the previous program, I talked about Eusebius and Constantine. I want to talk a little bit more about Constantine because Constantine has become a very controversial figure. And a lot of people look at the church and say, well, what went wrong with the church? I think it's all a matter of perspective. There's a lot of things that went right with the church, and there's a lot of things that are right with the church today. But a lot of people want to look at the negative and say, well, maybe this is all Constantine's fault. Maybe he corrupted the church by uniting church and state. And I think it's a little more complicated than that. And it's Protestants that say that a lot. Oh, if Constantine didn't mix church and state, then the church would have been better. But then you realize it's like, okay, you're a Protestant, you believe in Martin Luther. Don't you realize that it was the political leaders, the German princes, that supported Luther, and without the state, these German political officials endorsed Lutheranism. even and crushed by the established church. So that's a very interesting thing that people need to think deeply about, is the role in church and state. But like I said, there's a lot of things that are said negatively about Constantine. I think there's a book called Constantine's Sword, and there's an Anabaptist theologian called Yoder who just attacked Constantine. But a recent book was written called Defending Constantine that I read, because I think we need to be reasoned people, and I have my opinions, and I try to have informed. I'm a very passionate person about my beliefs, but I try to have an informed opinion and think through things. So you hear all these people making these claims about Constantine, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. I want to read some information. I mean, if everybody's going to be going on about Constantine and just saying all this stuff, what's true and what's not? What do we really know about Constantine? What did he do? What did he not do? So I thought that the book Defending Constantine was very good. And I honestly believe that Constantine was one of the most influential Christians in history, based on his action of legalizing Christianity and freeing Christianity from persecution. The church was able to develop in Western civilization everything that came out of it based on his decision to do that. So was he a perfect person? No, he wasn't. But I think that history changed for the better because of Constantine's action. Of course, he did some things that were wicked, even as a professing Christian. And he also did some things that were foolish. For instance, like he sent a letter to the Persian emperor and said, well, I'm a Christian now, and I know that you have Christians in your kingdom. And that caused the Persian leader to be afraid about his Christian subjects and unleash a persecution. So it wasn't very wise for him to do that. I mean, I don't think he had bad intentions, but bad results came out of that. But I think that, I'm going to do some videos later on in the future about Constantine, because people just go on and on about Constantine. Everything's bad came from Constantine. He was the first pope, so they say, which he wasn't, couldn't have been, never claimed to be. And you have these church councils, and I haven't read every little letter from the Council of Nicaea, but the Nicene Creed, as we have it, came out of the Council of Nicaea, and that's just a statement of New Testament doctrine. So not everything is bad in that. And basically, the Nicene Council affirmed the scriptures and New Testament doctrines. But if you're interested in the subject, I'd recommend the book Defending Constantine, where you take a balanced approach. And he's not whitewashing. He's just saying, well, wait a minute, look at all these claims. Is this historical? And let's look at the influence of Constantine. Was it all negative? So, something to think about. So thank you for watching this program. God bless you, and stay tuned for other webisodes of this latest series in the life of St. Jude Thaddeus. So thank you, and God bless you.